Daf Mem Aleph Amud Aleph, 4 lines from the top. Amar Rav Chisda ein hakinem misparshes ella oy belekichas balam oy besiyas kain. A pair of birds don't become designated only at certain specific times. When a person has to bring a korban with a pair of birds, for instance, a zava, a yoledes, there's a pair of birds that are brought, and one is for an oila, one is for a chatas. How does the designation occur? When does it occur? So Rav Chisda says it only occurs on 2 specific times, either the lekichas balim, when the owner purchases the birds, or basiyas kain, when the kain is makriv, then the kain is makriv them as a korban. Otherwise, you can't designate them. Between those periods of time, you cannot make a designation. It's not a valid designation. It's either between the times of the purchase or the actual hakrava. The Rishonim speak out that the Dovid and Rashi, elsewhere Rashi increases, speaks out that when we say the purchase, it also means to say also the designation. It means the designation of it when they're designated as an oila or a chatas, when the designation is made, or when the money is set aside for that purpose. Then it also can, that the designation that's called the lekichas balim. When it's designated at the time that it's set aside, the money is designated, or the animals, or the birds rather, are designated for that purpose. As we'll see in the Gemara Vayter, even though we're talking about over here by the kinim, Rav Chisda says, ein ha-kinim misparshes, but what we'll see from the Gemara Vayter, it seems to be clear that, and the Teitz Shonim it speaks this out, that it seems to be clear that it's not referring only to birds, but it's referring also to animals. We're learning it out from kinim. Rav Chisda says the din by kinim, but we apply this principle to also behemoths. So that's what he said. That's the rule. The principle is that it's oy belekichas balam oy besiyas kain. Rav Shimi Barashi, in my time, the Rav Chisda, what's the reason for this? The Torah says, v'lokcha v'asa, you take it, and it's made. Then it's v'lokcha and v'asa. It has to be one of these 2 times. The pasuk says, v'lokcha shtei sayim, oishni b'nei yaina, echad l'hoila, v'echad l'chatas, and it says v'lokcha, and it says v'asa, oisim akayin, echad l'chatas, v'echad l'hoila. So there's either a lekicha, there is the purchase, or the asiyah, or the hakrava. So that's why it says these are the 2 critical times. So therefore it says v'dechsi v'lokcha v'asa, oy b'lekicha, oy b'asiyah, either the time lekicha or asiyah. Meisvei, I'll ask you a kasha, v'asau chatas. It says that v'asau chatas, that by Yom Kippur, it says that it's made into a chatas, that the girl makes it into a chatas. A girl is a chatas, vein Hashem is a chatas. The girl makes a chatas. The shem, the kriyas shem, a verbal designation, does not make it into a chatas. It has to be by the seirim of Yom Kippur. It has to be the girl that makes it into a chatas. Sheliachol v'aloy dinhu, because you would have said to make a kal v'chomer. You would have made a kal v'chomer and say, Malcolm shaloi kiddush a girl, kiddush Hashem. You see that kiddush Hashem is more prevalent, it's wrong. Madach in the case, like for instance, the case over here by Yoledes. The girl is not kaveya, the shem is, the verbal designation is, so therefore, Malcolm shaloi kiddush a girl, kiddush Hashem, Malcolm kiddush a girl, here, by the case of the Seirim of Yom Kippur, where the girl is Mekadosh, Ein Adin Shei Kadosh Hashem. You should say a Kal V'chomer that Kiddush is Hashem, a verbal designation, should be Kaveya, should designate it. Talmud Loimer V'asau Chatas. And it made into a chatas. The girl made into a chatas. A girl is a chatas. Vein Hashem is a chatas. It's only the girl that can make it to designate it into a chatas, and not a verbal designation, not the shem. So what do we see from here? The time of this designation over here is not the time of purchase. It's not the time of akrova. And I would have said, if not for the pasuk, that the shem is kaveya. if not for the fact that we have this limud vaso chatas, that what designates a chatas only the girl, I would have made a kal v'chomer to say that the verbal designation, the kriyas shem, is kaveya. Okatane de kava, and it says with the kriyas shem, the oral designation would have made it into a chatas. So don't you see, therefore, that this principle is not true? Rava says no. Hachikam. But it means as follows. Uma b'makom shalei kiddush hagar. Madach, by other cases where there's a pair of korbanos, like the case of the yoletus, Zav yoletus. Ma b'makom shalei kiddush hagar. Well, where the girl is not mekadosh, va'afilu b'shas l'kiach, va'afilu b'shas l'siyah, and even if it's the time of the purchase or at the time of the krava, the girl is not kaveya. You can't designate it with the kairal kiddush Hashem b'shas l'kiach or b'shas l'siyah. The kiddush Hashem, it is mekadosh, but davka b'shas l'kiach b'shas l'siyah. Makam shekiddush hagarol, in the case of this Ira Yom Kippur, where the girl is mekadosh shaloi b'shas l'kiach or shaloi b'shas l'siyah, is kaveh, even if it's not the time of l'kiach, even if it's not a time of a siyah, then the girl is kaveh. Eina din shekadash Hashem b'shas l'kiach b'shas l'siyah. Therefore, certainly the shame should be mekadosh. It should be mekadosh when either at the time of l'kiach or the shas l'siyah, not in the interim period, but in the shas l'kiach or shas l'siyah. So I would have made that kal v'chomer to say that the shame is kaveh. But when? When is the shame is kaveh b'shas l'kiach shas l'siyah? Talmud loy mevasau chatas ha'ger leisach chatas ve'en shame leisach chatas. So Shmuel, let's bring a raya from the following that it's not so. Like Rabbi Chizah said, let's bring a raya from the following that you could make a kiddush in the interim period. It says, Mitam Mikdash Ani, someone who b'shegeg was Tomei and went to the base of Mikdash, he has to bring a chatas. Now this is a case, one of the cases of korban oil v'yored, that he brings the korban depending on his financial situation. If he's an osher, if he's wealthy, he brings a female lamb or a female goat. Brings it for a chatas. If he's poor, he brings a pair of birds. One is an oila, one is a chatas. So if he was a Matam Mikdash Ani, he was poor, so therefore his obligation would be a pair of birds, one is an oil, one a chatas. V'hifrish moos lekina, and he set aside money for his pair of birds. V'hesher, and then he became wealthy, and afterwards he became wealthy. V'achar kach amar elul chatas ve'elul losa. And then he separated the money. So initially, when he was an ani, he set aside a pile of money for the birds. Then he became wealthy, and then he segregated, he separated, he said this part of it should be for an oila, and this part should be for a chatas. So now, at this stage over here, he is wealthy. He can't bring a bird for a korban, he has to bring a behemoth, he has to bring a lamb or a goat, a female lamb or a goat. So so he adds on to the money that he designated for the chatas, for the oil, for the chatas ha'oif. He adds on to that money that he designated for chatas ha'oif, and he brings a chatas behemoth. So ma'isiv maybe chayvasim b'nei chatosa, vein ma'isiv maybe chayvasim b'nei oilasa, but not for the money that he designated for the oila. The money that he designated for the oila can't be used for a chatas. You can't use that and now divert that from an oil into a chatas. So he can only add on to the money that was designated for the chatas ha'oif. He adds on to that and he purchases a behema for the chatas behema. Now here, when he designated the money, it's not the time of l'kiach or not the time of asiyah. Oktani kava. So, and it says it's kaveh, meaning it says when he designated, he segregated the monies for the oila and for the chatas, it's binding, and therefore the money that he segregated for the oila cannot be used for a chatas behema, and it's only the money that he segregated for the chatas ha'oif can be used for chatas behema. So this designation is binding. Now, even though this designation occurred, it was not at the time of l'kicha, nor the time of the siyah. And you see, nevertheless, it's binding. Amar of Sheshes v'Tizbara. Can you really say that this Baraisa, the way it's written, the way we have it, is correct? If a person was an Asher and he was wealthy and he brought a korban of an ani. So he was wealthy and he brought birds for his korbanos, for korban oil of yared. He's not yaitza. He's not yaitza for that. Now he came to the yotza. Now if he's not yaitza with a bird, now heichi kava. How can you say that the way the girsa that we have in the Bryce is correct, which says that he is hifrish moas lakinai, and veheshir, and after he became wealthy, he designated this for an oil, this for a chatos. If he's already wealthy, he can't bring a bird. So how can his designation be valid? How can it be binding? So heichi kava. How can you say it's kaveh? How can it be binding? He can't bring at this point, he can't bring a chatos for an oif. He can't bring an oif. And he cannot bring for his chiyuv, he cannot bring it for an oil. He has to bring for his chiyuv a behemoth. So therefore, how can you say it's binding? The Ritva gives a marshal to this by saying it's as if a person said that he says, this money, I'm designating this money for my chiyuv of an oila, for my chiyuv of an oila. And if he doesn't have a chiyuv of an oila, then it's meaningless. So if he doesn't have a chiyuv, what he said doesn't mean anything if he's asking for his chiyuv. If he's now an osher, what does it mean to say that he's segregating this money for his oilas oif and oil and chatas oif? He has no obligation for his for an oif to bring an oif. He has an obligation for behemoth. What must you say? Shikvar Amar Maniyusa. It means to say, no, not that he's saying it now after he became an Osher. It means to say he was an Ani. He segregated, he put a pile of money for his chiyuv, and he segregated, he said, this part is for my oila, this part is for my chatat. Then he became an osher. Afterwards he became an osher. The designation already took place when he was an ani. He's meisif on the mei chatasa, but not on the mei oilasa. So hachinami. So here also you'll explain, according to the Brisa that says Shekvar Amra Mishas Hafrosha, that he said that this already said it from the time of Hafrosha. He said that these are for the oila and this is for the chatas. He said it already at the time of Hafrosha, not at a later time. So I have to say that what he meant to say is that a person who was poor, he was ani, and he was Matam and Mikdash Kadosh, and he was the big Veshoige, he was Matam and Mikdash, and he set aside money for his birds. And at the time that he set aside the money, he said, this is for my oila and this is for my chat. It's not after the fact. So since we in any event have to say Shekvar Amar that he said before, and Shekvar Amar Mani Yusa, here also, according to Rav Chisda, means Shekvar Amar at the time of the designation, at the time of Afrosh, he said, this is for my oila, this is for my chatas. But that's fine if you say we're forced to say that to amend the Bryce and to amend it and the Girsa is not accurate the way it is. That's fine if you say that he's loyos. But according to Rav Yosha says that a wealthy person that set aside that birds for his korban, he is yaitza, so there's nothing forcing us to say that we have to amend the brisa, and if there's nothing forcing us to say that we have to amend the brisa, we wouldn't. How are you going to defend Rav Chisda? Because it seems to be over here that the effect of hafrosh is binding, even though it's not shas lekich or shas Mar says, Omar, don't say that afterwards he simply said it. What it means to say is that he initially designated the money when he was an ani. He became an ashir, and then afterwards he took some of the money and he bought a bird for a chatas, and he took some of the money and he bought a bird for an oila. So it's a shas lekicha. It's not a simply verbal designation between the time of Lakich and Asiyah. There was a Lakich, he purchased the bird. How can you say he purchased the bird? The Brisa says that he adds on to this money that was designated for a chatos, and the chatos oif, he adds on to this money and purchases a behemoth. Well, if he already purchased the bird, what does it mean he adds on to it? Where it says the parak means he bought the bird, he redeems it, he's paid it, and now with that money he adds on to that money, he buys a behemoth. You can't say that. In pigeon life, there's no redemption for a bird. Amar Papa, what must we say? Is going shalaka preda achas. He used the money and he bought one bird, and therefore he used part of the money to buy one bird, and then the other bird is now automatically becomes kodesh for the other pair. Meaning, for instance, he took the money, he designated the money when he was an ani. He became an osh, and then he took part of that money, and for instance, he bought an oila with it. If he bought an oila with it, that's a shas lekicha, and therefore automatically the remainder of the money has a designation of a chatos, because part of the money is for a chatos, part is for an oila. So if he purchased a bird for it, purchase a bird for an oila, that's a shas lekicha, and then automatically the remainder of the money has the kedusha of a chatos, and that's considered shas lekicha. So, if the money he purchased a bird for an oila, then the remainder of the money has the kedusha of a chatas, and that's what the brisa means. Then he adds on to that money, and he purchases a chatas behema with that money. And the bird that he purchased with the money the money that he purchased the bird with becomes an oilos nedova, because now he's an oshir. The oila is not for his chayva. He has to bring a behema for his chayva, for a chatas, and there is no oila. This becomes an oilos nedova. But if he used part of the money to buy a bird for the chatas, then the remainder of the money now becomes designated as an oil. But it's designated an oila, but now that he's wealthy, he has no chiyuv for an oila. He cannot use that money and add on it. He cannot use that and maybe chayvasim midmei because right now he's an osher, he's mechuyev for a behema. So that money is for an oilos nadava. And chatas hazal misa, and the chatas, the bird chatas, is used. He has to be left to die because he can't bring a bird chatas. So he has to now take other money and purchase it with other money. Purchase a behema for his chatas, for his chiyuv of chatas behema, because he's an osher. So the bird that he purchased, the money that he used to purchase the bird for his chatas, has to go lamisa. Now, even though we're saying, according to Rav Chaga, that after the fact, that if he's makravit, it's kosher, but lachachila, you can't be makravit. So it has to be also lamisa, that it has to be left to die.